My guest today on episode 76 of the Ikigai Podcast is Sue Langley, a keynote speaker, global consultant, and positive leadership expert. Sue specializes in the practical applications of neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and positive psychology, synthesizing the science and research into simple, practical tools that anyone can use. Her research aims squarely at the sweet spot between emotional intelligence, positive emotions, and brain science, inspires people to get the best from themselves and from their peers and teams. And this was certainly an experience I had last month with Sue on a 6-day intensive as part of a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. And it was a wonderful experience. We had a wonderful cohort. So it's so wonderful to be catching up with you, Sue. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Nick. I'm looking forward to it.
So am I. So I'll just touch on a little bit more about you. So you are the academic director of the Langley Group, and you offer the world's first government-accredited qualification in positive psychology and wellbeing. And this is how we connected. I'm one of your students, and as I just mentioned, I was part of this wonderful cohort, and we spent 6 days together. And I think it was life-changing for all of us. So, yeah, it was such a wonderful experience. So you must really love your work.
I do love my work. I am very lucky. I get to meet amazing people like yourself from all walks of life who really are just wanting to be the best they can be and learn about psych and emotions and neuroscience. So I love what I do and it plays to my strengths. So I'm very lucky.
Certainly does, yeah. So I witnessed your strengths in flow. I actually did some homework over the weekend and I wrote and read a gratitude letter to a very dear friend. So that was quite an experience.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing all about that one.
Yeah. Well, let's begin with your interest in positive psychology. When did that begin and what attracted you to study it and then obviously go on to teach it to others?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like many people, I found myself in a job that I enjoyed and I was good at. And so I was asked or invited to be the manager, if you like, of that team. And I'm sure, like many people like me, you're a good individual contributor. And then someone says, put you in a leadership role and you have no idea what you're doing. Because I'd been good at what I did and I wasn't necessarily good at being a leader and I had no training. So I took it upon myself to try and learn lots of things about psychology, the human behavior, those sorts of things, just from a general perspective. And I was lucky enough to sort of learn a few things about emotions, etc., from my reading, and I hopefully became a better leader because of it. But what I actually did is within my organization, we were told we were front facing, so customer facing. And each of us were told in our offices we could close for half a day a month for training for our team. And I was the only one of 9 offices that did that as a leader. So I literally used to close the office one day a month. And I would teach people what I'd learned. So I'd teach them about self-confidence and I'd teach them about self-awareness and self-efficacy and a whole bunch of things before I knew it was sort of an area of study. And what I noticed, interestingly, is our profits doubled 2 years in a row.
Wow.
And I was really impressed with my team because I never taught them customer service. I never taught them sales. I just taught them about how to be the better version of them. And so when I then wanted to learn a little bit more and I moved to Australia and I wanted to start my own business, I thought I really want to teach people about emotions. So by that stage, I was learning about the science of emotions from anything I could get my hands on. I did a psychology degree and I learned a little bit about pos psych. And I actually wanted to do a master's in positive psychology. But at the time, I'd only just started my own business. It would have cost me over $100,000 to fly back and forth to the States. So I'm like, can't afford that. So I downloaded the reading list and I read everything. And I sort of started really that way. And then I did my master's in neuroscience of leadership a couple of years later. So for me, I've always wanted to put those sort of 3 things together: the science of emotions, the science of the brain and the nervous system, neurology, etc., and then really looking at positive psychology and well-being and how do we get the best of each other and out of ourselves. And putting those 3 together really worked for me from a business perspective. And I think it works for our clients because if you put the neuroscience behind it, people get it. If you touch on the science of emotions and really what the science tells us, it helps people understand them a lot better than just the sort of superficial that we sometimes sort of floats around. So yeah, that was sort of my journey, and I keep learning all day, every day, and read research papers. And I'm a bit of a sad so-and-so when it comes, very geeky when it comes to reading.
No, I can relate. I'm very geeky with Ikigai and papers. A lot of research on Ikigai, and it sort of surprises me. You can have everything from Ikigai risks with AI, like we could potentially lose our Ikigai sources, to Ikigai robots. So, yeah, obviously Ikigai overlapping maybe with positive psychology. So that's what I thought we could touch
Well, I
on.
think it absolutely overlaps. That's based on my minimal knowledge of Ikigai. So I think, to your point, you probably noticed lots of overlaps or alignment between some of the themes.
That was great. And actually, I do remember during the 6-day intensive, I think you said something along the lines of 15 or 20 years ago, you'd pretty much had read all the literature on positive psychology, but now it would be impossible to do that because the last 20 years we've seen this incredible growth in research and publication. Yet many of the concepts on positive psychology have been around for hundreds or even thousands of years in other cultures. I'm not sure if this is the right question or if you have an answer, but why do you think the West was so late to research and study what makes a meaningful life?
Look, I think the difference is, so many cultures from all around the world, First Nations, Indigenous cultures, ancient cultures, we've always known about many of the things that are now studied in positive psychology because we're human. We want to get the best out of ourselves. We want to live a happy life, a fulfilled life, etc. So I think that's always been there. The difference being is positive psychology is the scientific study of that concept. So I think that's what's different for me is, how do we scientifically study? We've always known these things are important. There's so many things that I teach on a day-to-day basis that it's not rocket science. We know this stuff. But I have a saying, you know it, do you do it? So we've got the procedural knowledge and the declarative knowledge, and sometimes we know it, but we don't actually do those sorts of things. And I think what the scientific study of bit provides is a little bit more clarity around what works, why it works, how do we narrow it down, how do we define it? So rather than what we've known for centuries kind of works, we've now got sort of some more operationalized elements. Does it really change things? Maybe not for many people, but for some people it does, because there's more evidence that you can share with people of why it works. And I think that helps for many people.
I do think that's helpful, and that's where my interest lies, in understanding it and sharing it with others. So I think if you have all these perspectives and then you can have some evidence and research, that's you leverage off all these wonderful people who've studied it and published on it. We went through so much content in your intensive, and now I'm doing all this homework, making a good start. But I think it would be helpful to try and define positive psychology. So when you're asked, oh, what's positive psychology, what's your go-to answer?
Yeah, look, my go-to answer is probably twofold. One is the definition, which is the scientific study of human flourishing. If you want to put it in very, very basic terms, it's the scientific study of human flourishing, whether it's individuals, teams, or organizations. That's the sort of the definition. I suppose the way I think of it is there are so many areas now under the umbrella of positive psychology. As long as they're all in the pursuit, I suppose, of how do we be the best we can be, those sorts of things are covered. So whether it's mindfulness, or whether it's now nutrition is being linked in, or exercise, or from a neurobiology perspective, microbial perspective, genetics, there are many things that's now being encompassed. Basically, it all comes back to the scientific study of human flourishing. What is it that makes one human being flourish over another, or one team work more effectively than another? So I suppose that's what I always like to come back to. Well, what does the science tell me? And as I say, at a high level, it's the scientific study of human flourishing. How we go about it could be through many means, like the psychological well-being of meaning and fulfillment, and the values alignment, as well as the joyous subjective well-being of, am I happy today, and am I enjoying life and having more positive emotions in the mix, and many other areas in between.
Well, let's explore many of those areas in between. So your diploma has 5 main modules: emotion, engagement, meaning, relationships, and goals. And you bring many theories of positive psychology together in each of those modules, way too many to even attempt to mention on this podcast. But I thought we could touch on each of them and maybe share a little and see if they relate to Ikigai. So the first one is emotion, and I guess that's more specifically positive emotion. And I'd like to quote you: the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your emotions. So would you like to expand on that and just share what you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting. So I love the science of emotions, and I have to say that's probably where I first started, of really understanding the science of emotions from a physiological perspective, a brain-based perspective, the theories, the universal elements, the individual fingerprints that people bring to their emotions. And I think that's really fascinating. And I absolutely believe that quote: the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your emotions, because if I am having a bad day because I'm grumpy or I'm stressed or I'm anxious or whatever it's going to affect the quality of my life, the quality of my relationships, the quality of my communication, all sorts of things. So for me, although we focus on positive emotions from a positive psychology perspective, you'll know when we talked about that unit and we spent the time on that, we also investigated all of the, or many emotions, so the whole range of
Mm.
emotions, about what's the importance of emotions and what are they there for. And you will know, and I always use this sort of quote, is emotions are data, they're information, they're trying to tell us something. And I think that's, again, really important, is if I'm feeling anxious, anxiety is an emotion. It's just data, it's information, it's trying to tell me something. If I ignore that data, I'm probably going to have trouble with anxiety. But if I can learn from that data, what's it trying to tell me, and manage and handle that data, then I'm probably not going to have challenges. So for me, managing your emotions day to day, and I don't mean suppressing or controlling, I mean genuinely managing your emotions, experiencing those emotions, noticing them, understanding them, can be so helpful for us just to get through the day to day of, why do I feel nervous right now? Why do I feel anxious right now? Why do I feel excited right now? What's going on for me? And knowing what emotion is appropriate in which situation and what I need to do to harness those emotions to help me. I think that's such a powerful thing. And I noticed that we kind of teach it in kindergarten or something, where with the smiley face, the angry face, the happy face, or the angry, the sad, the smiley, whatever. And then we kind of forget
Yeah.
about it and wonder why human beings have well-being issues or mental health issues or various other issues, because we don't deal with those emotions.
No, it is fascinating because I'm in the middle of doing the mood meter homework
Ah,
and checking
love
in
that.
at least 4 times a day on my how on my mood, my feelings and my emotions. And it's very helpful because it's asking, what are you doing? Are you alone or with someone? Your environment, and then prompting you, what do you think is making you feel this way? And you see these patterns after a while, and yeah, it's going to be very helpful data, as you said. And I imagine in the future, I'll be able to think, well, I'm going to be doing this activity, and it looks like I find it makes me anxious. So at least I'll be aware of that, and then I can use some of this positive psychology to handle those future situations. And then if I find myself always happy and cheerful around people, well, I know what to do to become happy and cheerful. I go and catch up with friends or, meet new people. So,
I think that's the powerful thing about that. And I have to admit, I do that exercise on myself at least once a year, sometimes more, where I measure my mood for a couple of weeks and I see what happens. And I think it's so valuable, because sometimes we just go through life not actually paying attention to the things that brings us moments of joy or moments of gratitude or moments of anxiety. And to your point, when you notice patterns is when it gets really interesting.
yeah.
It's like, well, I could just stop doing that and put myself in those situations. Or I can't stop doing that, so I've got to figure out how to manage those situations.
Yeah, very helpful. And it sort of, I think it also highlights the importance of, being obviously aware or mindful, which we'll touch on in a minute. But I wanted to tie in Ikigai because Ikigai was defined by this wonderful lady I told you about, who I like to refer to as the mother of Ikigai. And she defined it, you have your Ikigai sources, and then you have Ikigai Kan, and Kan is, perception, awareness, or feeling. And she made this point that Ikigai is something you feel. It's what makes you feel that life is worth living. And yeah, this emphasis on feeling rather than achieving or being successful or all these things we tend to value, or we're sort of encouraged to value in society. We sort of don't look at our emotions enough. And if we do, you know, it's not always sort of encouraged in a positive way. Like, oh, you're emotional. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because many organizations measure engagement. And sometimes I often do a keynote on this. It's called basically You Can't Have Engagement Without Emotion. Because if you think about it, people measure engagement, but they don't realize the value of emotion. But you can't possibly be engaged because it's a feeling. I feel engaged. Well, there's emotion. And to your point, absolutely. If we don't understand those sources of emotions and the feeling that we experience, yes, we can keep achieving. But if you're not actually enjoying the journey, if you're not leveraging various things that bring you those moments of joy, sometimes, and we see this all the time with people in the media, for instance, that achieve really amazing things and earn loads of money, etc. And then we see their well-being just falling apart. Because if we're not paying attention to the feelings, what's the point in achieving those sorts of things?
I think Olympic athletes are great examples once they retire and they've lost that purpose, and then they've had all that success, and then all of a sudden what made them successful is not a big part of their life anymore, and they seem to really struggle that they don't find something to transition to, or that they don't find something, I guess, intrinsically motivating to make them feel, okay, that part of my life was great and it's gone now and I can accept that. Yeah, so achievement's like a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting
great, but
you say that about Olympic athletes because sometimes what happens when they go from amateur to professional, what you find is that people are amateur, if you like, and they go to the Olympics, but they put all that time in and they get the benefit from the connection, the sense of being there. They put in hours and hours, and then they turn pro.
yeah.
And then get given $1 million contract by Nike or something, and all of a sudden now it's about the money and I have to be good because I've got to keep my contract, as opposed to actually I'm doing it because I want to be the best.
Yeah.
And we see it happen with celebrityism all the time. And again, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have nice things, but again, to your point is, what's the feeling behind it? Why am I doing it? Am I doing it because I want people to think I look good, or I want to dangle diamonds around my neck or wear a particular brand? But it's about, how do I feel as a person, and what am I experiencing along the way?
Yeah, isn't that weird how success almost results in some athletes or some people losing the intrinsic nature of what they love, and it becomes extrinsic,
Yeah.
and they lose the love, and then they often fall apart. They often turn to drugs and
And it's that
alcohol.
sense of meaning, yeah, that we spoke about before. Have I lost my sense of meaning,
Yeah.
that intrinsic motivation of why am I even doing this? And it becomes about, to your point, yeah, and the extrinsic, where I kind of have to keep doing it now to earn the money that I want to earn, and that's no fun.
No. So during your course, we explored several positive psychology interventions: physiology, humor, curiosity, savoring, appreciation, and gratitude. And yeah, when I was reviewing everything for this podcast, it made me think, gosh, we have to be, aware in the moment and mindful to, yeah, enjoy these moments of humor, savoring and whatnot.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, often we notice the negative emotions more. And I was having this conversation with a group earlier on today is, you have 8 hours in your day and 7.5 hours go well. And then there was one phone call that made you feel anxious or angry or whatever and then you get home and your partner says, how was your day? And you're like, oh, you wouldn't believe the idiot I spoke to this morning. But we may not always notice. And to your point is, for me, part of positive psychology and being the best I can be is, how do I also notice the good stuff? So how do I flip out of the not so good stuff, the challenging, etc. But also, how do I pay attention to those moments of gratitude, those savoring? And I will say, sorry, I'm getting excited now.
Good.
Um, I went to the ballet a couple of nights ago, and I hadn't been for many, many years. And it was with a friend that I used to go once a year. I haven't seen her in a few years. So we met up and we're at the ballet, and it was Swan Lake. So if you like ballet, and I'm not a massive ballet fan, but I have to admit it's pretty special. But the second interval, we had the interval, the curtains down, then the orchestra starts to play, the lights go down after the end of the second interval. And as the curtain rises, the scene on stage was so beautiful that as a collective, the whole audience, you heard, oh, this moment of awe across the whole audience, this sharp intake of breath, and then this, oh, because it was so beautiful. And for me, I've shared that story now a few times because I want to hang on to that literally collective moment of awe and beauty. And sometimes, to your point, we miss those moments. We hold on to the anxiety-provoking ones, the anger-provoking ones. But what about all those beautiful moments?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think my time in Japan also made me realize how certain cultures really do seem to emphasize gratitude and appreciation, and just even, yeah, the appreciation of nature. And Japan's famous for having these words that express concepts in nature that we understand, but we just don't have words for. So they appreciate it so much, they come up with words to articulate certain aspects of beauty.
Well, I know, and I'd like to ask you, Nick, sorry if I may. There's in English, we've translated a Japanese word to forest bathing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that really captures the Japanese version of that. So I don't know what the best word is or what your thoughts are. But whilst forest bathing is nice, I have a feeling in Japanese it's much more meaningful than
I mean, the
bathing in a
direct
forest.
translation is, so it's shinrin yoku, and shinrin means forest, and yoku is a word for bathing, but it's actually using your five senses out in nature. And when you practice this, you walk extremely slowly, as almost as slow as possible, and you try to experience nature with the five elements. And I guess with taste, if you can eat edible plants and whatnot, maybe you do that. But if you can't, maybe you take a tea or something, or something to eat, and just enjoy that. Yeah, that's a relatively new practice. I think it came about in the 70s as a solution to, Japanese being overworked and stressed, but it's sort of evolved as well. But yeah, Japan's connection with nature, that they certainly understand the benefits of spending time in nature. And of course, they have those beautiful seasons of, sakura and the autumn leaves, koyo. So yeah, they really enjoy the moment. And that's something I'm trying to be more mindful of, to enjoy the moment and not be too forward thinking, or yeah.
Yeah, and we can do that anywhere, really. Because for me, when you talk about that, it's a beautiful description. That's like savoring, of bringing all of your senses to that moment. And to your point, you're down the beach, you can taste the salt in your mouth. But are you actually paying attention, or are you just, oh, that's pretty, let me find a spot on the sand, or now I've got sand everywhere, and now I'm too hot, or are we actually, to your point, really indulging all of our senses in a moment? And I think there's something special about that.
Well, that almost leads to engagement, which is all about the connection that we have with an activity or our environment. And in this module, we explored flow, which I was really interested in. And I think flow is sort of misunderstood as something that we can ease into if we're strictly talking about positive psychology. It has a sort of a different meaning. So would you like to touch on, what is flow in the context of positive psychology?
So flow is an interesting one, and I think it's where knowing the research can be really useful, because sometimes people assume flow is when time just disappears and you've had a lovely time. That's nice, but it's not, strictly speaking, the concept of flow. What I love about flow is particularly one of the 8 concepts, if you like, or components of flow, is the where skill and challenge meet. And I think that's what people sometimes miss. They kind of just say, oh, I had a lovely evening, I got absorbed in Netflix, or oh, I was gaming until 3 a.m., or oh, I had a lovely conversation and time disappeared. Well, that's nice, but it's not flow, because flow has an element of challenge. And where I think that can be really useful is going back to what we spoke about around emotions. Let's imagine I notice when I'm doing an activity that I tend to be bored a lot. Brilliant. Flow can give me a tip that says, hang on, if I increase my challenge level, then I am more likely to get towards flow and out of boredom. Equally, if I'm feeling highly anxious because what I'm doing is far beyond my skill level, then I either drop my challenge or I increase my skill. And again, it reduces the anxiety, moves me closer to flow. And what I also love about flow is you can't make it happen. It's a bit like happiness. You can't chase happiness. We actually know from the research that pursuing happiness means you're less likely to achieve it.
Yeah.
Flow's a bit like that as well. The more you try and make it happen, I'm going to experience flow today, it's probably not likely to. But if you
So.
if you look at the particular components and you put things in place that allow flow to happen, you're more likely to have those moments where you're so engaged in what you do that when you come out of flow, you're like, oh, that was a good day. That's cool.
Yeah, that's interestingly one of the first papers I found on Ikigai when I was looking online at, I think it was ResearchGate, was related to flow. And it was such a jargon-filled, complicated piece. I put it aside for a couple of years and then thought, oh, I should get back on to this paper. And yeah, it basically wanted to see if Ikigai, the feeling of Ikigai, increased in the flow state. And what they found was there was this connection between flow, Ikigai, and sense of coherence.
Mhm.
And it was on Tai Chi practitioners. And basically, they found that the longer these people practiced Tai Chi and the more engaged they were with flow, obviously, the more they felt Ikigai. And then they also experienced a sense of coherence and that idea of comprehensibility, manageability, and meaning making of an activity. Because Tai Chi is obviously quite difficult as you get more advanced, all these subtle movements. And so, in short, it's like you experience Ikigai when you're in flow, but also you experience this sense of what you just said, this sense of life satisfaction after the flow state. And you realize, oh, yeah, that was awesome. That was very satisfying. So, yeah, Ikigai sort of popped up there as well. And so that's a module I teach in my own program, based on this paper. So bringing evidence to all these concepts, always exciting because you think, well, this is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, what you've just done there, which is so lovely, is help understand that these things are all related. So to your point, if it's coherent to me, I might increase my sense of meaning. If I'm using my strengths, I might increase my sense of engagement and my connection to what I'm doing. But also then I feel good. So I feel good about the fact that I've made a difference or I've done something meaningful or I've learned something or I've grown. So there's a wonderful cohesiveness, I suppose, around all of these theories in the way they come together within us as a person.
Now I'm going to contradict what we've just talked about because you always seem in flow when you're talking and you're very vibrant and happy. And during our 6 days, you were just awesome, amazing facilitator. You didn't need notes. You were just everything you could answer. And when you couldn't answer, you said, I don't know, but it might mean this. So you seem to be maybe what we could in this kind of low level of flow all the time. You really love your work. You're engaged. So when do you actually reach that strict, let's call it that strict definition of flow where your skill level meets this certain challenge where you engage in flow? And does it happen often?
It's a really good question. I think I'm highly engaged in what I do. So you're absolutely right. I am lucky that I get to use my strengths a lot of the time. Well, when I say lucky, I'm also well aware I've made some decisions to make that happen as well. So I do get very engaged in what I do. I love what I do. I get energized by what I do. the moment of flow, to your point, if we stick strictly to those 8 components, it absolutely does still happen. And it's usually happens when I stretch myself or I push myself in a certain way. And I'll give you an example. So each year for the last however many years, I have spoken often at the Happiness and Its Causes conference. And I have to admit, I did freak out the organizer once. I think it was about year 2 or 3, when I said to her, when I speak at Happiness Causes Conference, I have made a decision that I am only ever going to do something I've never done before and I've not prepared for. And to the first time I did it, it was definitely a bit anxiety provoking. But since then, they're the moments I'm in flow. I had one example when I was in Iceland last year at the European Positive Psych Conference. I only finished the slides at 8 a.m. I didn't have them printed out because I couldn't, because I didn't have a printer. I basically scanned them on my laptop and then I got on stage at 9 o'clock.
Wow.
And I just thought to myself, okay, whatever slide comes up, I'm just going to go. And I have to admit, and there's a picture of me as I come off stage, and that's the moment where I came out of flow and my colleague captured it, and you can see by my face of like, nailed it. But I literally couldn't remember the previous 58 minutes. I was so absorbed. So to your point, because I love what I do, and for a lot of things that I do, I've done them for many years and I've learned more. I tweak things, I stretch things, but I always find little scenarios where I push myself a little bit further every so often that makes me go, "Ooh, that was a moment of flow." Doesn't always happen, but I try and create moments where it can.
I like this strategy. I might implement it. So
It's fun.
put yourself in this slightly, or maybe even very uncomfortable position to see if you can, handle it. That's
Yeah. Sometimes I've gone too far, believe me, and it goes anxiety provoking again. It's like, whoa, slow down.
All right. Well, let's move from flow or engagement to meaning, and this is interesting because you noted that meaning is something we create. It's not something that just appears, and there's no set way to find meaning. And I think we would both agree it's about having a sense of purpose, living in line with your values, and generally having an overarching sense of psychological well-being, which really speaks to me of Ikigai. So it's, these ideas really overlap. But what I really liked was exploring Paul Wong's work and his dual systems model. And this, I guess, this relatively new type of positive psychology, existential positive psychology. And I guess some people might even call it sort of the dark side of positive psychology. And his work work touches on this idea of embracing both positive and negative emotions because they coexist. And that we shouldn't always be just pursuing or trying to pursue happiness and this idea of, I guess we could understand it, of toxic positivity. So, do you want to touch on existential positive psychology and this problem of placing too much importance on trying to be happy all the time?
Yeah, it's really interesting because happiness is an emotion. It's fleeting. It comes and goes. And to your point, all emotions are valid and we will experience them. Everybody listening to this has been through adversity. They've experienced some challenging emotions. So just pursuing happiness, the positive emotions is not enough. And one of the things that I think is really important about the meaning component is you can have a really bad day emotionally and not be particularly happy. But at the end of that day, you've done something meaningful. And even an exercise that I often do is I ask people to share something they're proud of. And the one thing about that I find time and time again is very rarely does the thing that someone's achieved that they're proud of just include positive emotions. They've usually felt some stress, some anxiety, some pressure, some difficulties, but they've kept pursuing it and now they're proud of it. And I think for me, this is where meaning comes in is, yes, I can have a happy life and isn't that great? And I can buy stuff and I can have stuff and whatever and there's nothing wrong with that. Going on a nice holiday and doing something lovely, great. But again, the thing that will give us more fulfillment, I suppose, is what it is that sense of meaning, that sense of being aligned to who I am. And you will know this, I'm sure, that all of us have had those moments where you just feel something is missing. On the surface, it all looks good, but there's something missing. And for me, that's that meaning piece. And to your point, I think we sometimes forget that we create it. And I'll give you an example. So I run a monthly thing called Learn with Sue. And one particular session, we were talking about interoception, so where we feel things in our body. And I had some different scenarios that I wanted to play so that people could, or use so that people could feel emotions in their body. And one of the things that I did, mainly Australian people who were on the call, I played the what I think of as the Qantas advert, the Qantas song
Oh,
of "I
yeah.
Still Call Australia Home," and people experienced an emotion of like, "Oh, I love that! Oh my God!" And then I had another one, which was a poem. Now, this particular poem is I Hold Your Heart, I Hold It in My Heart, E. Cummings. And my sister was on the call and she immediately burst into tears. Now, that's a beautiful example of meaning because that poem was meaningful to me and my sister because she read it at my nan's funeral. Now, that's an example of meaning making. That poem meant nothing to many people on the call. It's just I carry a heart in my heart. It's a poem. Maybe I've heard of it, maybe I haven't, but it's meaning. We're just about to launch the LG Foundation, and it's in honor of my nan. And at my nan's funeral, there were dragonflies. So whenever I see a dragonfly, I think of my nan. So on the LG Foundation website, we've put the logo as a dragonfly. Again, I showed it to my sister the other day, and she went, "Oh, thanks, Nanny." Now, again, a dragonfly is a dragonfly, but we have made meaning. And I think that's the thing that sometimes in life we're waiting for this sense of meaning and fulfillment. And yet we forget that we create it anyway. So why not create it with something
Yeah.
powerful? And just coming back to Ikigai, because I know there's an overlap here as well, and you mentioned the words before, is when I feel I matter. And often human beings, we want to feel valued. So I want you to value me for something,
Yeah.
and you want me to value you. But again, one of the things that people miss is one of the best ways to feel valued is to do something of value.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's powerful
Sure.
when we know that.
Yeah, no, it's sort of got so many things I could touch on because I remember that activity we did with what's something you're proud of, and I was really lucky to be partnered with Francis, and I talked about my book I wrote, and it was a nightmare at the beginning. I'd spent $10,000 on a book coach, and it was the worst possible experience. And after 3 months, I had nothing. The process we went through did not work, and we kind of both knew it wasn't working. And so after 3 months and $10,000, I thought I'm really invested now, so I have to write this book. And then, yeah, that was a real challenge. And then I was lucky in that I had a lovely editor, someone from my own community, and it was hard because yeah, I kind of embraced and thought, well, if I'm going to write this book, I'm going to sort of reveal everything and not hold back and share my most intimate thoughts and some stories and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I struggled at school. I barely got through school. So I had to face all these demons and kind of think, oh, am I worthy enough to write this book? So you're right. You make meaning, often more meaning, out of these challenging experiences where you overcome adversity or you break through a perceived barrier and you sort of realize, oh, I'm capable of more. Or maybe you get closer to fully accepting, who you are. And it's far more important to have those challenges than to always be seeking comfort or leisure
Mm.
or happiness.
And think
So,
about how much
yeah.
more meaningful the book is through that. If you'd have just sat down and just, banged it out on your laptop and blah, 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 you wouldn't have that same sense of
Right.
connection or achievement or growth or meaning from it. So I think
Yeah.
that's cool, even though it's painful.
Yeah. But it makes it all the more worth it, and I'm proud of it. So it's
Absolutely.
funny. The one thing you probably think you'd never do sort of becomes the one thing you're pretty proud of,
Mm.
and it's it's funny how meaning works.
Yeah.
Another thing that you note in your program is we take this hit if we as you just said, if we no longer have like a role that contributes something to the world around us, we take this hit and we feel that we don't matter. And this is evident as people age and retire. And it's actually a big problem in Japan. And what happens in Japan now, or what is happening, and this is going to sound really strange to people who don't really understand Ikigai, but because Japanese retire, they lose their sense of Ikigai because a lot of Japanese find work is their Ikigai. So now there are these health and Ikigai advisors who are of retirement, they're also of retirement age, and they take a program and become certified to advise these retirees on how to transition from a work life to a social life. So I think role is really crucial for our sense of well-being, our sense of purpose, and this ties obviously to our relationships. And you touched on Chris Peterson's work and his mantra of other people matter.
Mm.
So would you like to talk about Chris and his contribution to positive psychology under the module of relationships? Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting because Chris Peterson's work really sort of focused on strengths and things like that, but he absolutely lived and breathed the other people matter mantra. And what we know is to matter, often it's mattering to another person, as in, what do I do in my role? Does it matter? Do I contribute? Do I make a difference? And you'll see this come up in all sorts of sort of popular books as well as the research, is relationships being absolutely critical. And to your point, our role often means we matter to somebody else. We matter to the team, whether we're leading the team or we're within the team, or our role matters because we're making a difference to our customer or whatever it happens to be. When you take that away, often not only to your point, when people retire, not often you're taking away the meaning potentially, and the mattering is, do I matter anymore? Well, no, because I'm not doing the same role. But also you may take away the relationships and the connections that people have had in their workplace where they were valued for something, their expertise in a particular way. And I know myself, I don't particularly like the idea of retiring because I'm well aware that a lot of my mattering, my meaning comes from what I do, but also the relationships, that the people that I get to meet, the connections, the ripple effect that I get to have. What am I going to do if I retire? Just going to sit at home and contemplate my navel or take up knitting or something? I don't know. I want to still be able to contribute. So I think the meaning and the relationships connect, as in, do I matter to somebody? Do I matter to my children? Do I matter to my partner? Do they matter to me? Am I contributing to the wider society? Do I volunteer? And this is what often people who thrive in retirement is because they've got social connections. And we get that from every culture. If you look at the longevity study through Harvard, the number one contributor we know from that is social relationships. Because again, I matter to somebody if I've got a relationship. I matter to you in our conversation. You matter to me in our conversation. So even just those relationships that we have, whether they go for minutes or hours, days or years, we matter to another person in that moment. And I think there's something quite important for us to nurture about those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. This again is where it overlaps with Ikigai. Ikigai is very much tied to your social world, so family, friends, role, and these health and Ikigai advisors. I've managed to get their training books, and they kind of have this classification of first person Ikigai. So that's your relationship with yourself, but ties in your interests and hobbies. Then you have your relationships as a second classification. So family, friends, and then society, and how are you involved in society as this third person relationship, and are you contributing to your local community? Are you volunteering? Are you involved with, you know, the children in your community, or the elderly in your community? So it really seems to come back to people, that we have a sense of connection, that we matter, but also that other people matter to us. And so when they do matter, obviously you want to spend time with them or help them.
And I think to your point, we kind of all know this, but I always like to point out it's not about other people, as in lots of people, or extroversion or things like that. It's just human connection. We need human connection to survive, to thrive, whether we're a baby or whether we're in our 90s. We need human connection. And even if you look at some of the blue zones, obviously Japan is one of those areas. Human connection and social connection is so important. In Italy,
Yeah.
all the people come out into the square and they sit and chat of an evening and things like that. So again, sometimes we need to remind ourselves to nurture that connection for our own well-being and for the well-being of society as well.
Yeah, one of the interesting aspects of the Okinawan Blue Zone was this concept, moai, and it's basically means a small group. And I'm not sure if they practice it now, but what they did, obviously over 100 years ago, they would get children together in groups of 6 and 8. So basically, you are going to be lifelong friends. And yeah, that's what they were. And so sort of 10, 20 years ago when Dan Buettner first started talking about the Blue Zones, he had this case study of these friends and they're all in their 80s or 90s and they're drinking and still having sex and playing music and
Yeah.
all living life as if they were in their 20s and really enjoying life. And they've been friends for over 80 years, which was just astounding. And still looking out for each other. And that just doesn't seem to happen anymore. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
So,
we move around a lot more now, I
yeah,
suppose. So sometimes it gets more difficult.
yeah.
Although if we use technology wisely, maybe it helps us too.
Yeah. Perhaps one of the most challenging activities in the 6-day intensive was related to forgiveness. And this is obviously related to relationships. And yeah, this can be very hard to practice. It's sometimes hard for us to let go if we've felt we're wronged or we ruminate, we want revenge sometimes. So let's get clarity on what forgiveness is in the context of positive psychology and why is it beneficial to practice
Yeah, well, I think I'll flip your questions around first. Why it's beneficial is because relationships are so important to us. So if something happens and I can't forgive, I may be cutting off a relationship that, to your point, could lead me into my 80s because we're all going to mess up and say or do something that hurts another person at some point. So I think we need to get better at forgiveness. We're not perfect. We may have stuffed up. Hopefully someone forgives us because we didn't really mean it. And hopefully, therefore, we can do the same for other people. So we know it's really important for those longer term relationships. If we think about what it is, I think it's really important to understand what it is compared to what it isn't. It's not about forgetting. It's not about making what happened okay, but it's letting go of the anger and resentment that you feel about the wrong. And this
it?
is again what people misunderstand is forgiveness isn't me saying to you, Nick, I forgive you for whatever I believe you've done to me.
Yes.
It's actually me going, I forgive Nick. I am over it. I am able to handle it. And I think that's the bit again that people think it's about how do I get revenge or how do I tell you that what you've done is not okay, but blah, blah, blah. It's actually not. It's me. It's basically me handling my emotions.
Yeah.
And the thing I really love about the research here, Fred Luskins is a particular wonderful researcher who's done great research around forgiveness. What he finds is often forgiveness comes around with gratitude. So gratitude is an essential part of forgiveness because it might be that I'm grateful for how I've grown because of that challenge. It might be that I've been able to let go of whatever happened and move on. And I am grateful now for what happened because it taught me something. So the interesting thing is it's those two seem to be connected, which I think is quite fascinating.
It is fascinating. And it's helped me let go of two relationships that they need to end, but I don't harbor any more hate or anger or,
Perfect.
I'll even have sort of these nostalgic, funny memories of one person in particular. And yeah, it makes me feel good. but I've also accepted, okay, that's not how it is anymore. And it hasn't been like that for many years. So I can let that friendship go and not feel, anger and frustration because of all the all these things that happened, relatively recently. So I think that that point of accepting what's
Mm.
happened and you coming to terms with the relationship and your emotions, and then kind of this forgiveness of, okay, yeah, I can let all the negativity go. And I guess depending on the context, you can mend things and continue the friendship if that's possible, or you can let it go but not harbor any more anger or negativity, and you wish
Mm.
that person well, and really mean it.
Yeah, the important thing that you just said, and mean it. Like, I'd really love it if they fell over and broke their leg. Not really meaning it. So to your point, how can they still flourish, but they're not in your life anymore? That's
Yeah.
okay. And I think, again, it sort of comes back to to your point earlier about the self-acceptance of, can I sometimes forgive myself for the various things? Because I see so many people who are still beating themselves up over something that happened 20 years
Ah,
ago. And they were a different person then. They had different knowledge, different awareness. And yet we haven't forgiven ourselves sometimes for decisions we've made, stupid mistakes we've stuffed up. And so forgiveness also comes back to me dealing with my emotions rather than being angry at myself, etc.
this is wonderful you've mentioned this. There's a neuroscientist in Japan called Ken Mogi, and he has a book called The Little Book of Ikigai, and he has 5 pillars of Ikigai as a framework. And one of his pillars is releasing yourself. And it really just means fully accepting who you are and being comfortable in your own skin. And he makes this point that if you can do this, if you can fully accept yourself, you're like this far better person to be around, because if you're less critical of yourself, you're far less likely to be less critical of others. And you won't be looking, you won't be identifying for any negativity, because you just won't see it anymore.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, forgiving yourself or releasing yourself is beneficial to everyone. So, better
Absolutely.
just to
No,
do it than than keep beating yourself up. Like, just
absolutely.
yeah,
It's hard work to hang on to that anger and resentment all the time.
yeah. So, do yourself a favor, guys, listening. Just accept yourself and move on to the things that matter. And this sort of ties into goals now. So we'll touch on goals. And yeah, I'm just being aware of time. So thanks, Sue, for staying on. So let's touch on goals. And at this time of year, people are very likely to start thinking of some new goals for next year, and New Year's resolutions. But most will struggle to pursue them after a few weeks as we get back into the swing of things. Do you want to touch on goal setting theory and offer some advice on how to frame goals effectively?
Yeah, look, I think there are a couple of things here. Is we know from the research that goals that are pursued driven by positive emotion have a much greater chance of you continuing the pursuit and therefore achievement than those driven by negative emotion. Now, when I say that, most people will go, "You're there, that makes sense. It sounds logical." And yet many people set goals around negative, as in, I must do this or else, I should do this, etc. So the first thing I often think about is, how do I put as much positive emotion as possible behind my goal? Even if I sometimes don't feel like doing it, how do I add positive emotion to it? As far as framing it, I always try and say, how do I pull towards what I do want as opposed to running away from what I don't want? So the example that I often give, and we talked about this on the diploma, is it's not, I want to lose 10 kilos by Christmas, which is a negative, and it's kind of arbitrary. I jokingly say, well, you could chop off your leg and lose 10 kilos. That would still achieve the same outcome, but that's not what you want. And what people sometimes miss when they're setting goals is, what will it look like when it's solved? Because the losing 10 kilos is irrelevant. What I actually want is to feel fit, healthy, and vital. I want to feel energized, etc. I want to be a great role model. So this is the thing I often say to people is, what's your why? What will it look like when it's solved? What are you going to gain from whatever it is? And when you can keep people pulling towards that, it changes things. I'm not doing it because I have to, or I should, or I must, or I set this goal, etc. And some people maybe just be driven by that. But most of us are driven by what will it look like when it's solved, the why behind it, which comes back to all the wonderful things we've spoken about is, are my goals aligned to my sense of meaning and mattering? Are my goals coherent with my values and how I live my life? Am I using my strengths to achieve my goals? Am I making a difference with my goals, or are they just all about me? So again, the thing that I love about the goal framework is, how do I keep pulling towards the why, the what will it look like when it's solved? What difference will I make by doing it? And the other thing I will just mention here is people always hear the statistic of 80% of New Year's resolutions fail. And I often say, awesome, that means 20%
It's pretty good.
succeed.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Why not set some? I'm not a massive New Year's resolution person, but I do often use what's known as the fresh start method. And the fresh start method, the 1st of January is a perfect fresh start. Even if you've only got 20% chance of success, surely it's worth giving it a go.
I like that. Yeah. I found on goal setting, and obviously I learned about this through the program, the idea of being conscious of your strengths and leveraging them, and then writing that out, because I had pretty much the goal you were talking about, like lose 10 kilos or get down to 75K was it. And then, reframing that to, okay, I'll use my strengths of playfulness and excitement and energy to engage in, body weights and weightlifting activities to become more nimble and flexible and strong, so I can, play fight with my son, or, still engage with my son. And then it
Yeah,
becomes almost like a process, yeah, and meaningful. And it's really worked.
absolutely. We're back.
It's really worked, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So I'm sort
good.
of turning on the music and doing exercises that feel right. So I also listen to my body, and I think, oh, if my hips are tight, I'll stretch them and work the legs. Or if I want to beat my chest and and look good, I'll bench press. So it's fun. It's sort of become fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I love about what you said there is bringing your strengths into the mix. Because again, I want to lose 10 kilos by Christmas. Well, that doesn't indicate I'm actually going to do
Exactly.
anything. Whereas using my strengths of playfulness, blah, 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 to do something, then at least there's some ownership, some action, whatever you, as opposed to just, oh, well, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. And strengths are so good. I love that you've got the playfulness one in there. I think that's
Yeah,
awesome.
that helps a lot. So what about you, Sue? I know you're going to Europe next year, so that'll be exciting. But do you have any plans or goals or dreams for 2024 that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, I do. So I love what I do, and my idea is, how do I create sort of bigger ripples? So the reason I get out of bed every day is to what other people do. So people like you, people like anybody listening to this, what do people do to make the world a better place? The last few years I've been thinking more about, how do I make a bigger impact, again, not just with me, but in bigger ways. So I have a keynote, The Future is Human, which is about sort of integrating what would we do if we embedded positive psychology into media, politics, education, etc. So some of my goals are about, how do I try and influence on when I say a bigger stage, I don't mean how do I earn more money and get paid for lots of keynotes. I mean, how do we start to chip away at education or
Sure.
politics or those sorts of things that make the world better? So that's one thing for me. We've also got some exciting new courses. And I have to say, I just got the news before I jumped on this, that our Certificate 4 in Wellbeing Science is
Oh, nice.
renewed. So we're launching that next year. I've got a neuroscience program that I want to bring to the fore. And also, I'm lucky enough to be speaking at the European Conference for Positive Psychology in Innsbruck on a really new endeavor about supporting people from a post-psych practitioner
Wow.
perspective. So there are some sort of big goals there that I'm excited about.
You'll be busy, but yes, yeah, if anyone's interested in studying positive psychology, you could try this diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. And I had a wonderful experience with you, and Francis and all of our cohort members. As you know, I fell apart one day, so it was a very safe environment, and I felt totally at ease to share myself, and it was a wonderful experience. It'll be a very meaningful memory for me. And you are the most amazing facilitator, speaker. You're lots of fun too, so that really made it enjoyable.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me today. So people can go to langleygroup.com.au to learn about all those courses, but you also have another website, learnwithsue.com.au, and I think you have a podcast as well.
Yeah, so I have the Learn with Sue Walk and Talk podcast, and certainly the langleygroup.com.au will provide some of our courses, and then the Langley Group Institute.com is where they can find the diploma of positive psychology. And I have to admit, it was a great cohort that we had, I have to say. And I love the diploma because, to your point, that immersion in the learning and then seeing where people go with it. We never necessarily designed it to change lives, but it seems to, because people really integrate the learning into their life personally and professionally. And I just think that's lovely. So thank you for being a key part of that for my 2023. And I'm looking forward to 2 new cohorts starting in February, which will be wonderful.
Fantastic. No, wonderful experience. So I highly recommend it. And I'll keep in touch so we can share our notes on what we're doing. And I think this studying positive psych sort of really pushed my my future forward and what I want to do. So thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me on here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you take it.
Thank you. Okay, catch you later. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ikigai Podcast. To learn more about Ikigai or to become a certified Ikigai Tribe coach, visit ikigaitribe.com.